And so tonight we are welcoming Zachary Stephens. He's a visual artist and educator whose work has been exhibited nationally and internationally, including at the Photographic Exploration Project in Berlin, Germany, which I kind of want to hear more about that. GABA Gallery in Los Angeles, Candela Gallery in Richmond, and the Griffin Museum of Photography, which is actually where I first saw his work a couple months ago, I believe, as well as a lot more galleries and venues around the world. Tonight, Zach will be showing his work, sharing his work with us, and that will include his recent cyanotype project, Watching the Ice Melt, which addresses climate change through concepts of memory and loss, and the presentation of what I see as the macro on a human scale. We will have a Q&A after Zach's talk, so if you have any kind of general questions, you can hold those till the end, till the Q&A. If you do have a question about an image or a particular concept he's talking about, you could pop it into the chat and I'll break in and relay it to him as he's speaking. I think that's it. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Zach.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks for having me here. I'm really, honored that you want to hear me talk about my work, and happy to share with everybody here. I'm also super excited to help support Halide in any way possible. I love the fact that you guys are so inclusive in your programming. And it's something that I'm really passionate about as well, with the organizations that I've been connected with in the past. So my presentation here is kind of going to go through a little bit of the work that I did in the past, where I'm coming from as an artist, as well as this current project called Watching the Ice Melt. So I'll briefly go over some of that older stuff and kind of how it's connected to what I'm doing and what I'm thinking about now. And please do let me know if I'm going too fast, or if you have any kind of pertinent questions about the work as we go along. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. Let's see. So starting right off here, my name is Zach Stephens. As you know, I am a photographer, artist, and educator. I'm based out of Hinsdale, New Hampshire, and I have a studio in Brattleboro, Vermont as well. And I also teach at Franklin Pierce University in Rindge, New Hampshire, Keene State College in Keene, New Hampshire, the Putney School in Putney, Vermont, and Springfield College in Springfield, Mass. So I'm really kind of all over the place teaching. And then spending whatever time I have left with my family, and also, trying to make work here and there. When I started making work, started working, hold on, this is difficult. I can't see anybody. That's not fun. In the back a second. Stop share. Let's see, participants. Okay, I can't see that. All right, I was going to try to pull in some thumbnails so I can actually see everybody else, or at least a little bit of the people, so I don't feel like I'm talking completely to myself, but I'll do my best. So let's see, I started my career as a photojournalist, working for a number of different publications, and served at the Brattleboro Reformer for the longest period of time, covering all sorts of things, news related and breaking news, so fires, car accidents, politics, feature photos, all of that kind of stuff. And I spent a large portion of my career after college doing this type of work. And it was really kind of exhilarating and fun, and heartbreaking and sad at the same time. And it was all about capturing, whatever is happening in life, capturing whatever is happening in the community in the moment, and then sharing it with the broader community and leadership. And there's a real power in this way of working when you realize that you are the lens through which history is being distilled and then shared and archived. And it's something that I don't think I quite realized as much at the point. but definitely see the significance of it now. So these are just a few of those images that kind of demonstrate that line of work. And while I was doing that, I was working steadily as the photo editor and multimedia producer at the Brattleboro Reformer, but then been working for a few different publications as well along the way. Along with that, I've been doing freelance editorial work for quite a long time since I started my career in journalism, and then carried it over through my personal practice and still shoot freelance editorial work today. This is an example of one of the publications that I work for pretty regularly called 7 Days. It's in Burlington, Vermont, or out of Burlington, Vermont, but they cover the whole state of Vermont. This is a portrait of Tom Bodett. And here's another tear sheet from some work that I do for them as well. This is the sculptor Chuck Jennifer. There's a better resolution version of it. It's an environmental portrait. And this guy was great. And one of the really beautiful things about this type of work is really getting into spend some time with these people, listen to them, hear their stories, see their spaces, and then create something interesting from it. Doing the photojournalism type of thing, particularly for a small local newspaper, had me kind of bouncing around all over the place, making portraits, covering spot news, feature news, as I said, car accidents and fires and politics and that kind of thing. And oftentimes you end up doing all of this stuff within the time frame of a single day. And it can be a real emotional toll as you go from photographing something like this to photographing a baseball game immediately afterward. And it can be kind of chaotic and exhilarating, but also, as I said, that kind of emotional barrier. So I ended up leaving that world and then pursuing my own art and photography as my form of art. And I did that while I was working at the Insight Photography Project, which is a nonprofit youth arts organization in Brattleboro, Vermont, which is really dear to me and a really powerful and wonderful place that gives a lot of people quite a bit of opportunity. While I was there, I ended up pursuing my MFA in visual art at the Vermont College of Fine Arts in Montpelier. So I was balancing going to graduate school while I was also working at that organization. And during my time in graduate school, I discovered this kind of new way of working, which was this conceptual stage tableau photographs, in which I have this ongoing series. And this would probably be my main primary body of work. It's called Are We There Yet? And it kind of expands and changes and morphs, and it's ongoing. And I keep telling myself I'm all done with it, but then I make something new, as with a lot of projects, I think. So I don't really know where the end of this one is. But I started making this work in graduate school. And at the time, I had been really stuck in this documentary framework from my time in the newspaper industry. And even in graduate school, I didn't plan or didn't think that I would be interested in making anything outside of that, trying to capture some sort of objective, as much as possible, reality. And at one point in the process, something clicked for me, and I decided to turn the camera immediately on myself. And in this case, have my kids bury me with stuffed animals, and then created this collaborative piece. And this piece, which is called Stuffies, slowly transitioned and snowballed into this ongoing project, which became more and more collaborative, more staged. And then at some point with this piece in particular, I started compositing images together, which is a whole new way of working for me. And it helps to kind of break down all of these artistic barriers that I built up for myself, all of these rules that I've been playing by. So by turning the camera on myself, by starting to photograph and then compositing images together, this image here is composite of 3 different photographs that are then brought into Photoshop and then blended together to make this final image. It kind of allowed me to really explore the different ways that we use photography. And I think that's something that I'm really interested in with my students, is trying to get them to think a little bit outside of their preconceptions of their craft, or of the medium that they're working in, and then see beyond it and what is possible. What else can we do with these things? And when is a photograph, or when isn't it a photograph? This image is called Barbecue. This is another one. This one really kind of hit home for me. Starting to incorporate all of these little nuances and details within the photograph, these composite images, lighting. This is the first one that I started bringing external lighting into to really create a very specific feel and mood for the images. This one's called Project Car. You can see that I've been working on this for quite a while. I started it in graduate school, so it was in 2017, and this is a very small sampling of this work, and you can see more on my website if you're interested. But I've continuously been making it. I made it another piece in 2020. This one, and I don't know where these ideas necessarily come from. They're just going to pop up along the way and make a note of them, and then kind of work it out and eventually build something and give it a shot. This one is a composite of 5 or so different photographs. And then we had to work out some other things, like how am I going to write on the car? I make it look like it was keyed rather than just written on there. So we had to test out a bunch of different crayons to see if it looked like keying the car. And I think we landed on something that was pretty successful here. And this image seems to have connected with people pretty well, and it's been exhibited a number of different places. And then here's one of the more recent images from the series called Rebels. And again, same things going on here. All this work ends up talking about the kind of personal identity of fatherhood, of family life, or being a parent in general, of childhood, of these nuances of the suburban American family, all these things that we get from life and feed from the media, these little notes of capitalism and plastic and climate sometimes. All of these things kind of feed into these images. So this image in particular is really negotiating some of these topics of patriarchy and capitalism. As you can see, the kids are burning a Ken doll at the stake, that dominant patriarchy kind of thing, while they're also keeping a lookout to make sure that they're not going to get in trouble. So it has this sense of defiance in it as well. And none of, we didn't actually burn the doll. It's all photoshopped together. So the fire is on a different layer than the doll itself. And then my daughter on the right-hand side is kind of terrified of holding a match. So that's composited in there afterward as well. So that's kind of where I'm coming from initially, and transitioning into the main point of what we're here for tonight is this Watching the Ice Melt project. And the Watching the Ice Melt project, let's pop into this one, is a project that's based off of the cyanotype process. And if you're not already familiar with the cyanotype process, and from peeking at the attendance list here, I know that a number of you are. It's an alternative and antique process that's developed in the 19th century by Sir John Herschel. And it's known for those vibrant blues, which is why it's called cyanotype. And it's sensitive to ultraviolet light, so you can expose it in the sun, and primarily used as a contact printing process. And I've noted here too that it's popularized by Anna Atkins, who was created one of the first photo books with these cyanotypes, making these contact prints. What I found, let me back up a little bit. So that's the process that I'm working with. And it happens to be that, to my understanding, it's one of the most ecologically friendly photographic processes that exist. I'm not sure, but it seems to be true. So to make to sensitize the paper, you end up combining these two chemicals, ferric ammonium citrate and potassium ferrocyanide. You make a solution of water, like a little bit of ferric ammonium citrate with water, and then potassium ferrocyanide with water, and then you mix those two solutions together, and they create a light-sensitive substance that you can then coat on the paper, fabric, or wood, or any surface that's really going to allow it to dry. I believe some people are doing it on glass now too, which is pretty cool. And then you can bring it out to the sun and expose it to UV light, and then it's simply developed in water. So it becomes very, very easy, and it's very accessible for people that are just kind of diving into photography. And it has just these really unique characteristics to it. So I've been exploring with this process for quite a long time, ever since I started learning photography when I was a student, as a teenager. And then more regularly during my time at Insight as the program director, we use this process regularly. And then during my time in graduate school, I was experimenting with personal projects. So this untitled self-portrait, which I made in 2018, was actually created from a digital negative. So I made it in a large digital negative and then put it over this coated paper. And I'm particularly interested in the texture and tactile nature of this process. It's these two sides of the similar coin for me. So the tableau photographs that are highly composited and digital, they feed this one aspect of my creative need. But being that so much of the time is spent in front of a computer to make that work, kind of do this other stuff that's more tactile, that meets different needs of mine creatively. And I find it helpful and nourishing for the soul to do that, though it is difficult to navigate putting all of the work out into the world when they seem so different, because there's a lot of pressure as artists that we kind of will master and stick with one thing. I think that's kind of a capitalistic mode of thinking of branding ourselves so we can become successful artists. But I also find it incredibly stifling. So I end up bouncing from different style to different style and different medium, depending on what the needs of the project or what I'm trying to say with the project are. So anyway, I like the brush strokes that are in this, and this is an early test print to kind of see what was possible or what I was interested in doing with this cyanotypes. While I was at the Insight Photography Project, we'd often run workshops with the local youth using cyanotypes, as I noted, because it's such an accessible medium to start with and process to start with. So we'd set up and we'd bring plate glass out and find objects and just teach students how to make these simple contact prints, photograms, that kind of thing. And during my time at Insight, while we were doing these workshops, there was one particular workshop that we were collaborating with photographer artist Evie Lovett. I can't remember the other two. Two of her co-conspirators as well, and artists. They did this big project that they got a nice grant for, From the River to the River, I believe it was, which is very cyanotype based. And during that project, they collaborated with Insight to run this workshop for youth, so that way they could get youth involved in making these large cyanotype banners. So we spent a day out there in the 90+ degree weather that summer with a whole bunch of kids and a whole bunch of materials to make cyanotypes. And while we were out there, we were putting on grass and objects and different things that were pulled from the river that the artists had brought. And then there was also refreshments. I think we had some cookies and lemonade, and then there's this big bag of ice for the lemonade. So while we were out there doing all of this, thinking of what we were going to put on the cyanotypes, I thought it would be excellent to put some ice on it because of the nature of the process, where that light can kind of reflect and refract into the translucence of the ice and kind of create interesting shapes on the cyanotypes. And then I was kind of intrigued by the idea of that, like as it's melting out in that 90-degree heat, that it'll start developing at the same time as it's kind of exposing. It's kind of doing all of these things at the same time. So we threw down some ice for this project, but then I immediately went home and spent the next, I don't know, two summers, I guess, exploring, what it means to put ice on cyanotypes in the sun. This is one of the examples of those big banners that they were making for this project. So here's an image of simple ice on some coated paper out in the sun. And this is where the project really started for me, is putting some ice cubes, and this is just generic regular ice from your freezer, out onto some paper, and then letting it sit there in the sun until the ice is mostly melted, or until the paper is, fully cooked and ready to be developed. Uh, so here's some more in process shots, as you can see that it's starting to cool up and change. And immediately it was kind of taken with and inspired by this, not only the nature of this process of, exposing and developing kind of simultaneously, but really using these elements that become symbolic for something else. Like, to me, immediately melting ice is, in the crazy, very hot summers, which we were having and still are having, became a metaphor for glacial ice melt and climate change for me. So I spent the time not only making the work, but also kind of thinking about what it meant to be making work about climate change, or to trying to not just making work about it, but trying to access that in some way. And what really resulted with a lot of this work is not so much like a call to action or anything like that, though if anybody is inspired to get up and try to make some change after looking at this work, I think that's amazing and wonderful. But there's something more solemn about it, and part of it is that in the area that I live, and that you don't really see the effects as dramatically as you would in different areas of the world of climate change. And it also feels like there's so little that you can do at times. And in terms of making art about it, it feels like there's even less that you can do. So there's this mournfulness that happens within this work for me, that rather than that call to action, it's kind of holding space, and it's a forlorn memory of something that is disappearing or is already gone in some instances. So here's some process shots as we go along too. And not only are the end product, I think, visually kind of interesting to look at, and these abstract shapes of the melting ice and organic kind of flows of the water dripping and stuff like that. But the behind the scenes look at the ice itself and the pooling of the water, I found really, really intriguing. And I really didn't capitalize on that as much as I would have liked to, and document it as much, but I think that could have been something too. I'm sorry. Okay, so here's another behind the scenes image of ice sitting on a cyanotype paper. And it really started with just these simple ice cubes, just to see what would happen. And these initial images are what really piqued my interest the most. It was the way that they kind of drip and converge, and the drips start to become almost like tears in some of them. The shapes all kind of melding together. This is the final image of that one. And this one's titled Cryosonite. It's made in 2019. And I was thinking about all of these little dots that were showing up in the ice. So these weak points that have bubbles in them, and then the sun gets through them more. And I watched this documentary at the time. I think it was the Chasing Ice documentary, the James Baylog one, where they noted these dark spots in glaciers that they collect like this black matter, and because they're black, the sun heats them up first, and they become these cavernous holes that they start melting further, and they become big fissures, so they become really problematic, and they're called cryosonite. Here's another behind the scenes image, and then this one is called Fracture. It's a 14 by 11 inch, and all of these things are they're exhibited without glass or without anything on the front of them, to kind of take advantage of the textural quality of the final image, but also to retain their somewhat delicate nature, because I think that feeling of delicacy is important with the meaning behind the work too. It's another behind the scenes image. So this is just moving some paper around in the water bath, developing cubes. And here you can see that I started changing up the ice cubes a little bit. So we went from those little small cubes in the fridge to some much larger ones. Oops, there we go. This image is called Witness. Um, it's 12 by 9 inch. Most of this work is pretty small. There's a few diptychs, and there's, they're all kind of a little bit different. And the shapes that they form paired with the titles try to evoke some different feelings and meanings along the way. This is Witness number 2. And these 2 images are 2 of my favorite from the series, these 2. And there's something about the texture that got pulled out, and they're almost, they almost feel like X-rays at the same time. They become quite abstract. It's one of the early ones called Weep. Again, with small ice cubes pulling together. And along the way, as I was making these, I was trying to find like the right techniques to get kind of a consistent visual framework happening for the images. And the final project resulted in about 25 images, although I made a couple hundred altogether, but there was a lot of editing that had to come down, and things that I felt like were working and things that were not working as well, ones that paired well together and didn't pair well together. This is Untitled. So this is an example of using a larger block of ice. This is just one large mass. It's a 12 by 9 inch paper. I was also using a variety of papers trying to figure out what was going to work the best. This one's Untitled, 350. This is one of the diptychs. So again, using that large block of that large mass, I had this this tub that I would freeze over and over and over again. So I had a similar block of ice, and then experimenting with what happens when you let it melt like halfway, and then taking a wet block of ice versus a dry block of ice and putting it on, and seeing the different effects at that point as well. Untitled Chaos. There's that large block of ice again, but suddenly taking on different forms. And I found that was kind of interesting too, is how that same block takes on these different forms and starts to disappear. And there's a few images in here that became much more important. So the initial images were the small blocks of ice as they kind of drip and change and stuff like that. But the ones that I felt like became much more impactful for what I was feeling and thinking about at the time are the ones that start to become less prominent as a photogram or having distinct shapes, the ones that have the sense of disappearing along the way. So pieces. This is Monolith. It's another diptych. This one's Melt. So here, and for those that are interested in process a lot, this is what happens when you put like wet ice, like a slurry of ice on it. So the water is immediately starting to develop, though you still have these faint exposed areas because of the sun going through, and it hasn't washed away all the chemistry yet. Then we still have these outlines of the ice. And it's definitely much more enhanced after hitting it with a little bit of hydrogen peroxide. Brings out all the rules there. And this is the one image in the series, and this is actually much easier to see on a screen than it is in real life. It's a little bit more faint. The one image in the series that has some sort of representational figure in it. This is in a large negative of one of my kids that is, how did I do this one? I exposed the paper first with the enlarged negative, then I took the negative off, and then I put ice on top of it, and then melted the ice and exposed it with the ice on top of it. So we have just this like almost a latent image of a figure in the background that becomes a little indiscernible, and then things all kind of melting around it. And this really became symbolic of thinking of the future of who gets this planet after we're done with it. This is Frequency. This one is Fragment. I think this might have been the one image that I left in the series from experiments during the winter. So this isn't just a block of ice. This is winter, like natural winter ice, starting to melt on the cyanotype paper. And I was able to make a few of these during the really abnormally warm days that we might have during the winter when there's still snow, but then it's a few days that it got into the 60s or something during 2019. So it's titled Forever. Let's float. This one's fading. So this one, again, it's these images that that become, a little bit more subtle that I think ended up speaking the most in the series. And then this is Drift. I believe this is, oh, no, that's not the last one. This is one of the early ones in the series, Descend, really taking advantage of that brush that I was using to apply the solution onto the paper. This is Cluster, Canyon. These large block ice ones really had me thinking about the glaciers. And I mean, during the time when I was making this too, I was also watching a lot of documentaries and reading a lot of books about climate change. Got pretty deep into it. And anguish. Okay, so now that's the bulk of the work. I think those are all of the pieces in the series. I'd love to hear what your interpretations are of them or questions about them. I like these talks a little bit better when they're more conversational. With that said, before we move on to that, this is something I've been working on, and this is there's a rough version that I'm super excited to share with you all this evening. This is a very short, about 4-minute, I think, video that I've been working on that it's kind of a companion piece to this Watching the Ice Melt series. So here we go.
Nearly half a billion animals are dead from Australia's raging wildfires. More than 12 million acres of land are scorched. Images alone can hardly illustrate the vast
scary. It's so scary. To go and leave your home, everything you own. Yeah, it's not fun. It's not fun.
If you don't believe climate change still exists, talk to a firefighter.
And it's simple. When you
Images like this exactly
what the West Coast is seeing this summer,
a new study shows that
Further warming,
It can make a difference if you use snow and ski, wearing a jacket or not. In your day-to-day life,
climbing or
you don't see it. At 3 degrees of global warming, you'll be catastrophic.
Heat waves, droughts, extreme precipitation, fire, really be the
warm weather than the atmosphere, ocean, land. Temperatures do rise by which therefore greenhouse gases
are the main drivers of warming.
rising sea levels, desertification. Hollywood has always enjoyed imagining the end of the world.
even as countries
While
around the world
blockbusters like this are clearly fictional, this film will show the scenario we all fit.
Climate change is here now, but we are also here now.
Even keeping
And if
them
we don't act,
exactly as they are
who will?
now. We're at a point where we're trying to keep as much ice there as possible and really slow that rate of loss.
A UN-backed panel of climate experts has warned that future sea levels will rise by more than a meter by the next century.
Okay,
Wow,
that was it.
that was a lot.
So
Well-
I'm free for as many and all questions as anybody might have.
For those of you who do have questions, you can type them into the chat if you want, or there's the raise hand function. And if you click on that, I can let you turn on your mic if you prefer to ask the question with your voice. I just want to say thanks, Zach. It was a really interesting like journey to see kind of like your older work and like your professional work kind of segueing into your personal work and then into this new project. And then that video was pretty like,
Thanks. Sorry, it was a little clunky at the beginning. I didn't realize how bizarre it was going to be to not see anybody's faces and to just kind of talk through it.
sorry, I turned my video back on to give you at least one face. And John Kramer has a question, so I'm gonna you
Hey,
can
John
turn your
Kramer.
mic on, John, and you'll be able to see his face too, if he has his camera on.
Hey, Zach.
Hey, John, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm well.
I'm a graphic designer, and I've worked with Zach's images before, probably in his documentary capacity. And I saw your show at the Griffin, and I didn't think of it at the time, but as you were talking about it and showing them tonight, I realized that they're crying out, and I'm glad I didn't put this in the chat before the video. They're crying out, I think, for some language.
Some language.
And not necessarily on top of them, but I can see them, and I'm not volunteering. I can see them in a book form, where there's text that, I mean, it could be anything. It could be anything. But I feel like having images that work abstractly and evocatively and openly would be really great in combination with text that's really about the things that you want them to be a metaphor for. Because I don't think they can't do that on their own. They did it for you when you were doing it, but I don't think they can do it really on their own. And I just feel like they are one thing on their own. And I loved the show. But I think there could be something else in combination with any text that you related to.
Yeah, certainly. I absolutely agree with you. I mean, an abstract image on its own ends up becoming wildly open to interpretation on whoever's looking at it. And I think without having, a direct statement or companion text along the way, it is difficult to access it in the same way the artist was intending. So I totally agree with you on that. And I think that this work is typically seen with a statement. But again, like, how many people actually read the statement and they go look at the work too? So that's a hard thing to negotiate.
Well, I always read the statement. Sometimes I wish I hadn't read the statement, but I always read this. I always read the statement. But I think that's different from having an experience where, I mean, the thing that we talk about all the time in graphic design is kind of the overall catchphrase is text and image.
Mm-hmm.
And I do lots of experiments when I'm teaching with students where they are take a set of images. I kind of learned this from Gerhard Richter, who made a great piece called War Cut, where he took details of a painting of his and combined them with text about the first Iraq War, the newspaper documentary text about the first Iraq War, and had a scheme for combining them, but they weren't chosen to relate to each other. And so I think if you just place some text next to images, even randomly, climate change related text in this case, but randomly next to individual images, I think you might just something will happen. It's like a magic trick. It's like something always happens. And the less predictive you are about the activity, it sometimes is the better.
Mm-hmm.
It is, you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like that.
This is not our little conversation chat. So I'm sorry for taking so much time, but it looked great, and I'm glad to check in with you.
Thanks.
Thanks, John. If anybody else has questions, comments, you can throw them into the chat, or you could do what John did and use the raise hand function. We'll let you turn on your mic and your camera if you want. Do you have any upcoming shows? I know we both referenced the show you had at the Griffin. Do you have anything else planned for this work?
Not for this work, no. The Griffin show is kind of the end goal for a period of time, and I wasn't really sure where it happens next. You and I were talking just before, kind of like when do you know when you're done with the project or not? And that's something that I've been thinking a lot about with this project in particular, or I guess with all projects. It's like it's hard to negotiate when it wraps up. After the Griffin show, I felt like I was pretty done just making this work. I had gotten really emotionally exhausted by it. So I started trying to move on to other things. Of course, you know, with that said, like I finished encoding that video this afternoon. So I guess I don't know if I'm done, and I don't know what happens next, but I would kind of love to see exhibit the work again soon, but include some projections into it in some way, shape, or form too. Well,
I liked at the end of the video how the kind of rectangles disappeared and it segued into the cyanotype image, and then with the movement of it, you could see the water. Like I like the incorporation of that like analog process and existing work of yours into like a new iteration of kind of a similar topic. I like that, the way you incorporated that.
Thank you.
Linda has a technical question. She's wondering if you wash the images after exposure, or whether you just leave them as is after the ice melts on them.
Definitely washing them. So they're placed out in the sun. The sun is integral to this project in particular. You know, you don't have to make a cyanotype in the sun, of course. You can just use a light box or something like that. But I make these ones out in the sun, and you know, I don't always let the ice melt entirely. Sometimes I pull it halfway through, and you know, tilt it just so that we get like a nice stream of water from the ice coming down in some trails too. And then from there it goes right into a water bath to clear it and develop it. And then it goes into a bath of water with a little bit of hydrogen peroxide. And then they're hung to dry.
Frank has a question, but before we jump to his question, I have another one. It might be, it's kind of technical in nature, but there are a couple of images, I think maybe with the larger blocks of ice, that within the ice form, there were all these textures within it, almost kind of like circular textures. Do you know how those came about?
It's really just kind of luck of the draw. It depends on how the ice was formed and how sunny of a day. There's certain days that work better than others when the sun was a little bit more intense and it could kind of penetrate through the ice. It also depends on how clear the ice was. So if it was a really solid, like a white block of ice, then the light's not going to pass through it quite as much as if it's a little bit clearer, depending on like the water content. And I didn't put any like effort into changing the quality of the water or anything like that, but those are observations that can be made along the way. So to get those textures, you know, as the ice starts to degrade a little bit. So the block started that thick. It's like that big, that thick. You start melting it and it gets to about that thick, then take it off And at that point, it's melted a lot and started to break up and fracture and fissure a little bit. So then I place it on a different piece of paper. And then with those fractures and fissures, the light's passing through it a little bit differently. And, you know, just those technical aspects of this project are really fascinating to me anyway. The fact that, I mean, anybody who's placed like a glass bottle on some photographic paper in a darkroom, you see that you can get like almost a three-dimensional shape as light bounces and like refracts off of that glass, and it kind of hits the paper in different ways. So doing it through ice outside is just taking it to that next level where it's a little bit unpredictable and kind of bounces all over the place. It creates different shapes and feelings and textures.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of variation within the images, just the look of them. So it's really interesting to see. So I'll jump back to Frank's question. He's wondering how your work as a photojournalist influences your current work and your teaching.
Good question, Frank. I think it's just having that. I mean, my work as a photojournalist is really, you know, technically skill-based. So there's, you know, doing that work, you develop all of these really hard skills in terms of image making, storytelling, that kind of thing. And those are things that I end up teaching my students, you know, right away, is how do we tell stories? How do we make technically, you know, successful images, but then how do we break all those rules at the same time to, you know, go into a different place. In terms of story, I mean, in terms of how it influences my work now, my personal work with this series, you know, I think that there's this aspect of storytelling, even though it's this abstract storytelling, it's more metaphor than anything else that is there. And with the other work I make, it's much less photojournalism, right? But it still heavily relies on this knowledge of the craft of photography, which, you know, you can love it or not, but you know, photography is one of those mediums that is highly reliant on a skill set, like a technical skill set that you have to negotiate and figure out. And you can tell when it's more successful than it isn't.
Thanks, Zach.
Yeah.
Gul has a comment. She says, in the first series, it's amazing seeing a father figure, surprisingly, instead of a mother figure, which is what she expected, and having you as a photographer, but also as a subject to her created a full circle of connection. And she felt that was a very strong body of work.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's good feedback. And feel free to visit the website. There's a lot more up there. I think there's 20 something images so far for that body of work.
And Frank had a follow-up, just the comment that it's science that invites serendipity in your work. And I was thinking of that the idea of serendipity, you know, just like letting the ice kind of do its thing with a little bit of like guidance from you, but just dependent on the way it happens to form or melt on that particular day. That's really what drives the final image. Right.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, as somebody who is coming from that photojournalist background and also that technical, you know, background, I went to the Hallmark Institute of Photography originally, and have developed all these skills and to be a commercial photographer, and to then be making this body of work where you're kind of setting the stage. You're using your skills and your knowledge to set the parameters. But then you kind of are releasing the control to see what happens next. And it was a completely different way of working for me and a different way of thinking about how we make things. I believe, what is it? John Cage had a whole like thing about luck and serendipity in art. Somebody who's here might know that better than me, but there's something there about, you know, just letting whatever happens, and then you kind of distill it afterwards or figure it out afterwards. Lost my screen there. Okay.
Yeah, an artist I was communicating with was talking about the non-human agency in her work. And so, and working,
great way to put it.
yeah, and working collaboratively with the materials that you're using. So I think that applies to what you're doing too.
Yeah, certainly.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions or comments to our chats get saved? And so if you want to just put something in the chat that might not be a question, but it's something that you'd like Zach to see, we can save the chat and then send it to him after the fact. So you can feel free to put stuff like that in there too, comments rather than questions. Questions are always still welcome though. If people still have questions.
I certainly am happy to answer more questions or have conversation.
Going once? Going twice? Last chance for questions. All right, if there are no more questions, I want, a thank you from Linda.
Yeah, thank you for being here to listen. I hope that it was interesting.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you.
And thank you everybody who came out tonight or stayed in tonight to join us. And we hope to see you at future talks and out there in the photo world. So thank you all.
Great, thanks. Thank
All
everybody.
right. Good night.